Hi everyone, welcome once again to the second episode of the Fireside Chat on cyber posture. Thank you once again for joining in the second week. Last week we had an interesting discussion with Mr. Milind Mungule on cybersecurity for fintechs, and this week we have someone who has been dealing with fintechs. We have with us the Director of Fintech of Estrogen Global School of Management and Head of Research at Varanium Venture Capital, Mr. Vikram Pandya. First of all, thank you, Vikram, for accepting our invitation and taking time off your schedule and joining on this Cyber Posture Live fireside chat. Thank you once again for joining here.
Thanks for inviting me as well.
So, my lovely audience, the topic for today is balancing innovation and cybersecurity in fintechs. It's the last topic which we ended last week, and we are taking a continuation from there. And we would be discussing how to balance innovation in terms of tech and security in the fintechs. To start off with, Vikram, my first particular question to you is in the rapidly evolving landscape of fintech, and we have seen a great growth in the fintech industry. Innovation is very crucial for staying in the competition. But having said that, how can the fintech companies strike a balance between pushing the boundaries of innovation and maintaining a robust cybersecurity measure?
Definitely. So let me start with the innovation life cycle itself, right? So whenever you think about innovation, we need to think, okay, you are innovating something, you will use certain tools, techniques, you will try to identify several ways in which you can disrupt the industry. But unfortunately, what happens, focus typically goes on the disruption part, but not on the design and delivery of the security part. Secure solution is, uh, in fact, your responsibility and everyone's right to get. And unfortunately, people don't think about security as a design process, but in fact, they think about security as an afterthought, and then they hire some agency to look at the security, and then they identify that okay, there are issues now in the computer software that you have developed or some design that you have done, and that brings you back to the drawing board where you need to start creating everything from the scratch, because security cannot be a patchwork. The moment you treat security as a patchwork, unfortunately, in whatever innovation that you are doing, that innovation is becomes useless, because that innovation cannot scale, cannot provide a secure solution. So security by design as a concept, as we call it, should be followed and practiced by all the fintechs. Security can never be the afterthought, as I again mentioned earlier. But at the same point in time, people think that okay, I don't have budget. But I can tell you the cost of implementing security when you are designing the solution is 1/10 of what you can end up doing when it is, let's say, identified by someone else saying that you need to change XYZ stuff. And that will bring back to the drawing board, and you will spend much more with the change request. And even internally, your time, effort, money will go. Sometimes you need to completely change the architecture because it was not secure by design. So all those things I wanted to highlight, that innovation itself does not mean that you are not thinking about security. Innovation means that you are thinking about a security first, along with other element when you are designing your solution. So security by design is the concept that everyone needs to imbibe, and then you need to follow that to the spirit. Then only you can get the secure solution for everyone. And I will, as we progress, I will give you enough and more examples which will make it more clear.
So, when we talk about innovation, right, a lot of fintechs are like bringing in IoT, they're bringing in blockchain, right? They're bringing in AI. Now, when these things come up, these attack surface becomes huge, but they also need that for the innovation, and they're handling customer data, which is financial transaction data, which is very crucial. How do they keep a balance on innovating with these kind of techs like AI, IoT, and blockchain, and also keeping a baseline at least for security?
Definitely. But let me tell you that even the answer comes from the question itself, saying that some of these technologies do provide you with the complementary skill set that one may need to do in the cybersecurity environment. For example, blockchain also gives you ability to make it more transparent, secure in some of the other areas. While it opens up new set of attack vectors, but it can patch the existing ones, right? So you need to balance it in a way so that you are able to identify that okay, these are the security risk that you are entering into, and there are two ways you can do it. One is without knowing what you are getting into, and you are simply saying, because I want to use blockchain, I'm trying to innovate using blockchain, I'm going to just use the blockchain without knowing about the risk that blockchain brings, and just starting with the solution. That is one way. Another approach is that I need to first identify the suitability of the blockchain in my solution. Really I require that or not? Because while blockchain may solve certain issues, it will bring its own new issues. And same goes with AIML, same goes with big data, IoT, any technology that you speak about. Each and every technology will have its own attack vectors that it will bring, or attack surfaces that it will expose. But the idea here is that, first of all, are you aware about them? Normally this developers or fintech founders will never be aware about them. That is the main first issue. So we need to understand that is the reality of the life. Nobody will know that, okay, this is how I need to secure blockchain. But that is where you require cyber security experts and the developers who understand this area very well. Today what happens, people say I'm having development experience, but is it with the security in mind, right? And even if you don't know, you can't judge any developer immediately that, okay, this guy can develop a secure solution. You can't. But what you can do is that in your agreement that you do, you can always specify that, look, security should be by default considered in your solution. If I do third party audit and whatever labs I found, you need to fix those issues definitely and without any additional cost. Because many a times what happens, these things are not included and you find out the same thing later, and they will say, okay, all these are the change request, and that will be again a trouble for you. And I'm talking about enterprise in general who will not have in-house developer, they will outsource certain development. When it comes to startups where you have your in-house team, now this is where the challenge lies, where you don't have experts. You simply believe that, okay, somebody will google something and do something. Again, that will not work, because you will need to have somebody who understands the security and helps you along with that development process. If you do it your way and you find out, okay, I created something amazing within 1 month, but to fix that with the security risk that you are having may take 6 months. But if you had considered the security, as I mentioned in the first question that you asked, if you consider security earlier, maybe it will take 2 months. You are taking higher time at the cost of wasting your more time later, but it will definitely help you in the long term. Finally, when it comes to the different solutions that we are talking about, let me give you some examples of how you can use this new technologies itself to secure certain things. So, for example, let's say zero knowledge proof, or even you are able to identify certain data sets and you are able to process the data set without decrypting it, right? So, you have homomorphic encryption, you have multi party computation, you have different algorithms which can mathematically make certain things easier to process or secure to process while not revealing the data. You can create not decentralized if you don't want to, but you can create distributed computing, which can make it much more easier for you to isolate certain things. Now, all these things are the techniques that you can use in a way to make sure that your solution is much more robust and secure while using these new technologies. To give you one more example, blockchain itself can give you an option to create different layers or layered networks. And those layered networks can have differentiated authentication and authorization metrics. And ultimately, everyone knows about zero trust framework. And typically zero trust framework continuously can help you identify that, okay, I'm not creating a solution which can have labs in between. At least I'm starting with zero trust at every layer, and that will be very useful. So to answer in nutshell, while every technology will bring its own risk, it also brings a solution to some of this risk. You need to just know what are the risks that you are opening, and what are the risks that you can address using the same new technologies. And as we discuss, there are 2 to 3 things, right, that everyone need to know. One is, every technology, while it may bring risk, if you know on some of the open source platforms, they will have certain risk identified. So that at least becomes your first go-to resource. But not only that, every security related journal on that technology will cover certain things. So while you may not know about anything, you are not a tech expert or security expert, definitely you will come to know about how this new technologies should be considered when you are telling to your developer, when you are talking to your uh, development team internally. You can at least tell them you need to consider this risk. Even if you can't fix it yourself, you can tell someone to do it for you, right? So you need to be aware about them rather than knowing how to fix it.
So my next question is a continuation of the question that we were discussing, right? Where you said like when technologies come in, they come in with solutions as well. But we'll see at times that everything in terms of tech, if you've seen the fintechs, is not built homegrown. They depend on few of the things on third parties like APIs. There might be other applications, right, or other services as well. How do they cater to this where the security of that third party is not in their control? So take for example, someone is using a CRM for the internal purpose. Now that CRM has a data leak, so their data is also compromised. We recently encountered that with one of the customers that we were working with. So how do they handle this? Because when they would be onboarding a big client, right? Take for example a Fortune 500 client, they would be doing their research work on that. That how's the security and all, and they might find out something which might be a bad reputation for the company. How do they handle this kind of a thing?
So first of all, we need to accept the fact that whatever you do, there is no way you can bring into existence a secure system which is 100% secure, right? That is something everyone knows. Now the idea is that how you will behave or how many controls you will keep in order to make sure that your vendor is secure, that you are working with or you are bringing in the environment, that is secure, and their systems you are not trusting. Again, coming back to zero trust framework, you are not trusting anyone. But at the same point in time, if something goes wrong there, you need to identify that what are the limitations of their system versus what can you do when it happens, right? Now this is where the control comes into picture. This is where the limitation of liability or litigations comes into picture. But ultimately you need to remember that people today, even the banks and NBFCs, when they work with the vendor, you have the vendor onboarding journey. That is the exact reason why people require ISO standard implemented, or people require these vendors to go through some sort of VAPT. And while all these things we do, we need to also accept that still, after doing all these things, there is a possibility that still it may result in some environment related issue on their side, and some security lapse may happen, because you can't fix human level security where human is releasing the let's say some bad actor is able to do social engineering, and majority of the issues comes from the social engineering. And if that happens, you still need to be aware about that. And ultimately what happens is, all these players in the industry, when they create this sort of partnership, they have the limitation of liability related clauses that you keep, indemnity clauses as you call it, and they also include some of the sector specific or industry specific clauses, right? So for example, in your case you mentioned CRM related stuff, right? Now you need to categorize the information security and classify that what kind of information is very critical, and you should not, typically if it is very classified information, you should not allow third party to store and record that, right? And with this data protection act which has come, digital personal data protection act, uh, all these things are very well identified within that, right? So you need to be well aware about how you can make sure that the security can be managed properly. Another thing is that you have nowadays few expert in managing security as a service or privacy as a service. So I will give you some examples of these companies, right? So you have someone like Skyflow or Basis Theory. These kind of players, what they try to do, they try to augment the security, and they try to create, in a way, abstraction layer on top of the privacy and security requirement under a different act and law. Now, when this happens, you as a fintech player can try and integrate directly with them so that they are compliant with all the regulations on the data privacy, ISO, whatever it might be. You are simply using their vault as a service where the privacy focused tokens and everything is stored. And you are not bothered about the security part, and it becomes easier for you to get onboarded by the some other company like bank or NBFC. That becomes very useful in the long term by reducing your compliance burden and increasing the reach and visibility, because you are still compliant in whatever manner you require, but at the end of the day somebody else is taking that onus and they are complying with the regulation and integrating with whatever is required as per the law.
Right. So when we talk about regulations, right? There are a lot of regulations on the fintech, especially right now, after a lot of incidents that has happened over the past few years. And if we talk about the regulatory bodies like RBI, SEBI, IRDA, they have come with stringent controls in terms of security, especially, which after talking to a few of the fintechs, found out that they are facing an issue with this because most of the time is what happens is it's not clearly mentioned what they want, right? And it's going on a loop on the mandates part of the regulations part, which kind of at times hampers innovation. So it's kind of a dilemma: whether should we be doing this, should we not be doing this? If we are doing this, are we complying with it? Are we, or is the mandate going for a toss? How to keep a check on that so that the innovation does not stop and they're at par with the mandates as
Compliances.
well. Yeah.
Correct. So I will give you a very simple answer by extending the previous answer. First of all this privacy as a service provider, they provide you compliance as a service also when it comes to, let's say, HIPAA compliance or GDPR compliance. So you have this different layers which are available for the compliances with different texts and regulation. That is one area. But second area for the fintech, however, is that it is very sector specific regulation. It is not a general regulation like GDPR, which is applicable to everyone. And that is where some player like you, or let's say somebody else, will come into picture, who can track that sector specific requirement and tell you that, okay, these are the checklist available. And maybe you want to identify that, okay, if you are able to integrate with the system itself and you can identify that, okay, these are the things which are readily verifiable that you are in compliant or you are not in compliance. And based on that, you can create a report that, okay, these are the n number of requirement which are quantitative in nature or more objective in nature, not subjective in nature, against which I can map out these are the system related implementation that you have done or whether you are compliant or not. Based on that, that kind of report can be shared. Whatever is subjective in nature, that is where the auditor comes into picture, or that is where the person who is doing testing comes into picture, because these are the subjective areas where you cannot easily identify what exactly is the requirement. But interestingly, nowadays with LLM in picture, you are still able to get some insight into what can be done to achieve that sort of compliance. And LLM is able to understand the legal requirement vis-a-vis what exactly is implemented. So people can do Q&A with LLM, which is trained specifically or fine-tuned specifically on the cybersecurity related and regulation related knowledge base. And once you get that sort of information, you can easily converse in a normal human language and you can get certain solutions. And what is the benefit? While you are not saying that I will 100% rely on AI, but you are able to at least get some guidance where otherwise you will require some expert to figure it out and the cost will be much more. So here what you are first of all doing, whatever is objective, you are taking care of that very easily by integrating in the system. Whatever is more subjective in nature, maybe you are integrating with LLM and allowing user to have a Q&A to figure out certain quick fixes that they themselves can do internally. Then when you call external party to do the complete audit again, and you figure out that, okay, now only 10 issues are there, the cost and time involved to fix them will be much lower, and you are able to then make sure that you are compliant at much lower cost but at a higher efficiency otherwise that you can get, right? So that is one approach. Second approach is that, okay, you need to, because you are in that industry, it is your uh, nature that you will check every day what is coming new, right? You need to know about that. And the moment you know about something new in the market or the regulation that you are supposed to comply with, typically you will have some time to comply with the regulation. And immediately, the moment you come to know about the regulation, you will need to work with industry people to identify the impact on your existing system. Now, this is where the enterprise normally gets stuck, because the changes which are required takes a lot of time and cost also. Every change request will sometimes, if it is a core banking system, it will cost into crores. So the question comes here that can you create a middleware which can handle these things without touching the core systems? Again, there are solutions which are available which can act as a middleware, and without touching the core system, it can handle these requirements. So you are still compliant with the regulation without worrying about how to change the existing legacy infra, because sometimes that company also is not in picture anymore. uh, I know still many people who are using like 1990s tools and software, right? Today, those companies either are not there in the market or they are not supporting that product anymore. So the best way is to create a middleware. So these are the two approaches people normally use to comply with the new regulations. And final thing is that just to overall stitch together whatever we have discussed, understanding the risk of not complying with versus the cost. Because sometimes what happens, let's assume you are very small player, you may think, okay, that is fine, I can still live with that because regulator is not coming for me any which ways. But understand that when you are complying with the regulation, what happens typically, that compliance today, when you are starting, when you are small, it becomes easy to comply with. You can test it out on whatever small data set that you have, while cost also is lower because you are at a smaller level. So it is sometimes better to start when you are smaller rather than what other people think, that okay, if you are smaller you don't need to worry about regulation or compliance. No, it is opposite. It is better to comply at the early stage so that your cost and time for compliance is lower, and you just need to look at the marginal compliance later rather than thinking about, oh, suddenly I need to worry about the entire compliance. Over
Just
to you.
reminds me of a proverb we learned in childhood: "Stitch in time saves nine."
Yeah,
Uh, so, okay, so we're done with the general questions, but we've got a lot of questions in the comment section, right? Especially on LinkedIn. So I'll start with what Mr. Tajdar has to say. His question is: should DevSecOps be given more priority?
definitely. That's when I said that not only dev SecOps, but also it includes that design part, right? So I'm saying your DevOps and DevSecOps in my view is same. It should be integrated rather than independent. It should be integrated. The approach should be such that you are considering security as at a time of planning as well as development, right? It should not be afterthought, which means that by nature it should be integrated approach rather than independent approach.
Okay, next question is from Santosh. What's your opinion on prioritization of risk? What should be the factors that an organization should take into account? So we at times we have a lot of cyber risk in the organization. I was asking, how do you prioritize it?
Always people think about cost benefit when it comes to things, right? But I would say it is the risk, nature of risk that you need to look at. For example, I will give you a very simple scenario. uh, till this day there are certain fintechs which don't really think, because they maybe they are dealing with tier 3 4 segment, right? They don't really believe that they need to worry about data privacy or security of this tier 3 4 customers. So they really don't bother about much more security. They think that okay, when you think about it, they believe that okay, as long as they are not able to do it, or this tier 3 4 cities customer are not able to do anything with the system, they are okay. Now in this scenario, when you are considering that sort of risk, you are opening yourself against the entire litigation process. Now this becomes, in my mind, it becomes the top priority area, because whenever you are subjected to goodwill and the legal risk, that is the highest risk you can face, because as a fintech you are dealing in trust, and once the trust is gone, it is over. So you need to look at industry specific factors, and for fintech or any financial institution, trust is number one factor, which means come what may, you cannot let go of the trust. That is the main reason you need to really worry about your cybersecurity. And we have seen in market there are responsible players. I will not name the other side of the story, which is known to the public, but there are responsible players, and then you have players which are not responsible. We have seen responsible players who are proactive enough to do the bug bounty related activities, right? Bug bounty is the best way to allow other people to test your system, to identify the bugs before some hacker come into picture and then you are screwed. It is better to have third party in a controlled environment to do certain things, and you can pay the reward rather than paying ransom for $1 million. It is better to pay maybe $1,000 to this guy, right, who is doing it for you. But there are people in India who are, in a lack of better words, so petty that they will share 100 rupees as a reward or 1,000 rupees as a reward. Now, you can understand that in that scenario, nobody is involved enough, or there is no incentive available for that person to really help you out, right? So whatever happens, you need to have that kind of a role very clarified in your mind, that security, whatever you think about it, the trust is involved in the security for the financial institution, and you should not let go of that. That is number one. So sector wise, trust may become a first and foremost consideration. Second point is that when you look at anything after that, anything related to PII is number one priority. PII in the DPDP Act, which is there, is also number one. So if you are systematically significant fiduciary, then also it is very critical. Otherwise, even if you are, let's assume that a small player, still it becomes very critical for PII. People may lose their data. And third thing is about, once you identify system related or infra related security in general, right? Because what happens is that whatever you do with the encrypted data, etc., but if you are not having the controls in place, the lapse may happen and you have zero clue about when it happened and how it happened. So even if something goes wrong, if you don't have a control for logging and for maintenance of the logs, it becomes impossible for anyone to figure it out, what happened, how it happened. So that becomes again very critical for infra and the logging part. So these are the three priorities I would say in general. Of course, there are industry level priorities and system level priorities, but in general, these are the ones.
So next question Shronali has is compliance the only factor that fintech should consider for security?
Not really. Compliance becomes the main factor to start with, maybe, because otherwise you can't really do the business.
Have a baseline,
But
yeah.
compliance, yeah. So compliance, while understand the reason why the compliance is there, you need to look at the spirit of the law. The compliance is there to make sure that the customer is secure. The way the data is handled, the systems, even if you think about some foreign actors taking hold of the data, right? You know, in the news you have read, so many hackers are from outside the country can hold the data and keep certain people or certain institutions on the ransomware as well. So the idea here is that you are able to create regulations to safeguard these people and identify certain risk, and that is fine. That is definitely what you will need to comply with. But as I said, when you are starting, maybe when you are starting without compliance as a main consideration, there are few more considerations which are in general good to have, or industry best practices as we call it, right? It is not required for me if I'm creating a solution for, let's say, traffic related application, right? It is not compliance wise, I'm not going to have any trouble, but I need to really worry about the privacy considerations that I need to look at from the perspective of ethical consideration. I need to look at from the perspective of the customer that I am dealing with. So for example, if I am tracking that person, and while I'm taking the consent, whatever it might be, I'm taking the consent, but I'm tracking that customer wherever he is going, etc. Now, ethically, is it good to do, or ethically it is good to really store the data the way I'm doing it? That is another consideration, right? So there are always going to be considerations which I need to worry about. Apart from those ethical considerations, there are considerations like, let's say, I need to maintain certain controls, right? Now, these controls are for me as a company to really worry about. Somebody leaves the company, I need to have automated procedure of deleting all the account or blocking all the connected accounts. Now that is something which is a logical stuff. If I don't have that in my control, then I may miss some of the systems where this maybe disgruntled employee goes outside, steals the data. So it is again in my benefit also to have these controls in place. So without compliance or regulations also, I need to worry about security and the control.
So a very interesting question by Abhishek, and it's very well knit with the theme that we have for today or the topic. Can you discuss the balance between delivering a feature on time and conducting thorough security assessment during development?
Okay, good question. So I can tell you very simply today. Interestingly, you can have Chat GPT create a solution within few minutes, right? Certain solutions at least. Now, when you say that I want to create this, it will generate the solution. Now, can you say that, okay, I got the solution within 5 minutes, so it is good for me, right? But that solution may not pass through the test of security and the way you want it, right? In the overall scheme of security. Because understand one thing, that additional feature that you are creating, how it is going to impact the existing layer of security is very critical. And if you are really thinking that you are able to deliver that entire feature within 1 hour or 1 day, you need to look at whether while developing it, have you considered the impact or implication on the existing security. If you have not done that, you have not developed this feature or solution. No, it just means that you have developed a working prototype. It does not mean that the feature is ready to get integrated in the holistic solution or overall solution that you have, right? So I will tell you a very simple scenario. When you are talking about uh, core banking system, why do you think this every change request is costing you so much? Because one customization means that you need to worry about all the integrations that it will get impacted, right? When you are creating this, what are the things which will get impacted? Not only that, you need to worry about what kind of other attack vectors you are opening up, right? Or attack surfaces that you are subject to. So all these things will come into picture, and that's the reason they take longer time and longer duration in implementation. But do you really believe that creating a query or writing a one small screen will really take time? Answer is no. You can do that very quickly. Now it depends. Now if you are a developer, you can tell the user, tell them these are the risks. If you are ready to work with that, ultimately you want to make money, right? So you can allow people to take that informed decision that look, if you want quick solution, I can give you, but I am not testing this with the existing security, etc. In case something goes wrong, I am not liable. Otherwise, I will require a number of days, and this is the cost. If you just want me to develop a new page without worrying about the security implication, this is my cost, this is my time, and that is the transparency that you require as a developer. So DevOps, when we say, I'm again telling you security is part of that. So your DevSecOps or DevOps, as you can think about it, even
Yeah.
MLOps nowadays, right? Security is always part of that. Because when we are talking about MLOps, let's say we are talking about data poisoning, we are talking about data which is uh, having the bias, inbuilt bias, right? You don't know because the data is so huge that is impossible. Uh, it is impossible to somebody coming and looking at the data or analyzing the data, right? So you are by default living with that bias, which means that maybe you need to fix that bias later, and you are not able to do it. And that is the real challenge right now. Researchers are working on that fact that how can I post facto fix certain LLMs with the alignment, as we call it, and security related, ethical related concerns. So those are always going to
Talking
be
about
that is the
yeah,
element.
talking about the post effect. The next question from Soham is, what's your strategy for responding to and recovering from a cybersecurity incident or a data breach?
First of all, you need to have a written policy about what to do when this kind of incident happens, right? Why written policy? Because panic has zero, let's say,
Valid.
anyone who is starting with something, right? So panic has zero scope of coming in. Otherwise, you can't do anything. So you need to have uh, curated and created policies for everything. And today, what happens? You have disaster recovery, you have business continuity plan. So those things are going to have, along with that, this cybersecurity posture management, as you can call it, or you can say that okay, if something goes wrong, security incident happens, how can I behave on that scenario? So you need to have policy and procedure. Number one. Now you need to really stick to that. Why? Because of course your policies and procedure will be more prescriptive in nature, and certain things there will be more descriptive, prescriptive and descriptive. And whilst other things, like for example, call the authority, right? Those things are going to be operational elements that you need to worry about. But ultimately, you need to immediately store and create a backup of your log from that date somewhere else, so that if something goes wrong, you still have certain backups. Fetch certain things, immediately revoke the access of certain people who you are suspecting might have some involvement in that. uh, Analyze the user logs. All those things are standard operating procedure, right? SOPs that you have. But along with that, people, many times people really forget to have that transparent communication with the user. We have seen this in case of even, let's say, LastPass, or we have seen this in case of LinkedIn in past, like multiple companies that we have seen. If you are not really transparent in telling to your customer, and if they come to know from outsiders, right, from media agencies, then even you have even more trouble. You are inviting more trouble than you really want in that situation. But at the same point in time, the statement should be, we are still investigating, right? So we are still investigating, and we'll let you know about how the entire investigation goes. But at least they should know that this has happened. You are supposed to have the proper PR team for certain scenario like this, where the PR team also knows what to answer to the investor, what to answer to the uh, media guys, for example. Today, unfortunately, nobody is prepared for certain things like this, and the response that we get is no response. Right? That is what you give. That we don't have any comments, and that is the worst thing to do. You should have clear communication coming out. Look, we have identified the incident. We are working with the regulatory authority or regulations that we are complying with. We are checking with them. The authorities are currently in talks with us. We have identified the agency who is working on the independent agency who is working with us to identify this. But make sure that it is clearly communicated. There are companies which do this very well, and there are companies who really screw it up. They, in fact, in past, you have incident in India where a company is ready to even pay ransom to some hacker, but they will not really say that, okay, this has happened. And you can see everywhere in the dark web that this data is already circulating, right? It is the worst thing to do. You are telling someone that no, nothing has happened, and then you are paying someone. That is worst thing to do. So that should never happen.
Right. So we have few more questions. I would request later if you could just go to LinkedIn and answer this. But we'll take the last question from here. We're already 37 minutes up. So it's from Ayatur, who is asking, what would be the impact of DPDP in the fintech industry? So his question is impact of DPDP, especially in the fintech industry.
So I thought, just to tell you, in fact, this can become entire DPDP session if I start with that, right? Because the impact can be really huge. In a summary, however, I will tell you that certain industry will have more impact than the other within the fintech itself. Because let's say there are certain data related agencies, right, who just deal with data, and they are, let's say, credit scoring companies which are dealing with the alternative data. They will have more impact in terms of the operational overhead. It will not be closed. It is not like they can't do it. It is more around how you can make it more simplified for the user to give the consent and manage the consent, how to make it more easier for everyone to look at the consent and verify the consent. So that will happen for sure. Second thing is that there is a concept of consent manager versus, let's say, there is a data officer, chief data officer as well. So chief data officer is someone who will work with the regulatory authority, while consent manager is someone who will work with the customer, which means that if you have any question related to your data or related to any other issue related to the privacy, you have one communication point or somebody who is identified as a dedicated communication guy to whom you can connect. The better part of this will be the beneficiaries of this new act, right? So you have certain companies like Say Mine, you have Incognito or Cognito, someone like that. Incogni, there is a company called Incogni. Now these are the players which are there who help you identify your digital footprint, and they allow you to take back your data or control over your data, right? Now these companies earlier could not offer proper solution to Indian customer because of the lack of act. Even if they send legal notice or on your behalf they send the request, there was no proper structure in which this can be tracked or monitored. Now you have that possibility where you can really claim back your data and control over your data, which means these guys will benefit. Nowadays you have almost every major countries have their own personal data protection equivalent act, and these companies will benefit out of that for sure. So you are looking at some of these areas which will benefit. Second point and the final point on the fintech in general. So companies which are collecting the data on behalf of somebody else. Now earlier what used to happen that, okay, bank or NBFC, you are applying for a loan. At that point in time, it was the implicit kind of a consent that you were giving. With that, I agree to all those things, right? You were giving the consent, and while installing the application, you were giving access to your phone data, location data, whatever. Now what will happen is that you cannot take the blanket approval. It is not possible, which means that if you are taking approval for core banking system, or let's say banking, mobile banking application, effectively not core banking, mobile banking application, then you cannot use that data in order to sell a loan to you, right? Or let's say sell a direct credit card to you. You need to take the consent separately. That look, I will take and collect this data to offer you a credit card product, or I will take this data to provide you home loan or personal loan product. Now, that is the main difference, and that will change the way banks work. They will need to use some solution which will give you a clear indication of what are the different products for which your data is usable, and you have the right. It is not like it can be hidden. No, you need to have a specific consent for every purpose, which means that you have a right to deny that consent. So that is more better for everyone. You have more transparency in the system. Why not? At the same point in time, cross-selling agents which were there, they need to think about the new way of approaching this entire thing. Some of the systems which were there, right? So I think again we can continue forever, but these are the some of the critical points that will change in the industry.
Surely we'll have Vikram for another session on DPDP specifically. Having said that, thank you, Vikram, for taking time of your tight schedule and being with us. It was lovely speaking to you, and
Same
hope
here.
to have you on another session soon on any other topic, right? And yep. So with that, uh, lovely audience will bring this session to an end. We had an amazing session today. If you have any more questions,
Thanks
feel
everyone.
free to drop. Yeah, feel free to drop in the comment section. Either me, Vikram, or anyone from our team would help you answer that and get it clarified. Thank you, Vikram, once again. And for the audience, do not miss out us on the Global Fintech Fest Mumbai. That's booth number E6 and E7. Thank you, everyone. Till next time,
Bye. Bye, everyone.
keep hustling. Yeah, bye.